right, what is up, guys, and welcome back. We're here again after a lengthy delay. I apologize for that, but joining me today is Morton, the lead designer of Global War 1936, versions 3 and 4. Today we're going to have another chat. This one is going to be about the ground units in version 4, and we're going to talk about some of the changes and some of the big differences that I have seen. So Morton, do you want to start us off with kind of your design philosophy for these ground units?
Sure. So basically, I want all units to be interesting in the game. I don't want too many units. I don't want too few units. I want just the right amount. And that's what we've been trying to hit going for V4.
So starting off here at the top, we've got Militia, which did receive, I think, a pretty big change, especially for Japan and the Commonwealth, because now you can only place a number of militia up to the IPP value of a zone outside of home country. So that particularly hurts my main Japanese strategy, which is to just load all the islands up with as much militia and infantry as possible and just kind of slow the US down. So this one hurts a little bit. Can you talk about it?
Well, actually, I did it just to piss you off, basically. I've seen your videos, and no, joke aside, the way that militia was being used for this defense was a bit too effective. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to address this, and it was an issue in multiple areas of the map, also in the Med. Mm-hmm. Was Gibraltar was.
That's a big one, yeah.
Egypt as well. So we wanted to address it, but we didn't want to take away some of the other areas where having a lot of militia is welcome in the game. For example, on the Eastern Front in Europe. And so that's why we differentiate between home country and outside home country.
Uh-huh. And it's worth mentioning that there is a slight boost in that you can now upgrade 2 militia to infantry per turn, which is a little bit better than in V3, so that helps. But certainly you can't put colonials on Gibraltar anymore, and you can only get 1 militia in there, so it's certainly going to be a little bit more difficult for the British to hold that, which is, I think, a good thing for Italy, and it'll make the men a lot more interesting. So moving on here, we're actually going to talk about one that isn't on this list. That's why we want to talk about it, because United States Marine Corps and the Special Naval Landing Force for the U.S. and Japan respectively have been removed. And I think the biggest change here is that it basically removes the ability for the U.S. and Japan to buy 4 Marines per turn, which I thought was interesting.
We did a lot of testing with how we wanted to implement this marine capability in the game. V3 introduced attack transports. So when we evaluated the land units for these special marines, we had to take naval transports, attack transports, this technology development into account. And it was quite difficult to work out the system where we don't make anything obsolete. Mm-hmm. And in that process, these special units they was removed from the game. So you can say that we could have them, but they will mostly be redundant. Uh-huh. And whenever I have something redundant, I typically want to get rid of it to simplify things a bit. So Marines, they get attack bonus in certain situations, and these elite Marines actually, if they have these very good attack defense values, for example, you can actually have an elite Marine being 6 in a city in defense. Mm-hmm. So there was some issues here, and we also tested a lot of different. Well, should these elite Marines be available if you have, for example, 3 regular Marines on the board? Mm-hmm. But nothing really turned out to be great, so we removed those.
Interesting.
And some people that want these units, they can opt in for the expansions or other means that introduce these units back.
Of course, and that's what makes this game so great. I think it certainly is interesting because you don't see particularly the U.S. buying a ton of ground forces for the Pacific. Usually, you see about one turn of ground forces being dropped, and then they send them over, and that's sometimes all you see. So, being restricted in the amount of Marines that you can buy certainly increases the value of those attack transports in the amphibious doctrine technology for sure. So next up, we're going to jump down to two more special units, the French Foreign Legion and the Gurkhas. I'm putting these together because they have similar changes and because Foreign Legion aren't seen a ton in the game because of the weaknesses of France. The interesting thing about these infantry is instead of having defensive bonuses as they did in V3, they've now switched to being offensive bonuses, which turns them from a defensive powerhouse into more of a versatile unit that you can use on the attack, but they're also good on the defense in the mountains here. So can you talk about this change a little bit and what made you go with the attack instead of the defense?
Well, the attack and when we switch the bonus, it makes it more fun. We've seen a lot of FEC being on the defensive side, really pushed back by Japan. But Gurkhas actually enable them to have a comeback later in the game when Japan typically is thin, stretched out. So these Gurkhas really a pain in the ass for the Japanese.
Uh-huh.
And they're already function as mountain infantry, so they get a bonus. So there's not much sense in giving them another bonus for defense, and they're already under a lot of pressure. So they need to have. They can really benefit from offensive capabilities. Mm-hmm. The Foreign Legion, we actually removed it from the game, but we put it back in. France, I feel sad for French players in this board gaming world because they just more or less have to roll over and die quickly. So we introduced and gave them this Foreign Legion unit, which has a special ability because they can get them for free if they have certain conditions. And so it's a nice touch in an otherwise pretty bare and not very interesting French section of the rules.
Another thing worth mentioning is the Gurkhas are now limited to being purchased around the Himalayas, which is a nice historical touch. But it also kind of restricts FEC in the places they can buy them. You can't just drop them into southern India anymore and suddenly have some more infantry down there.
And let me ask you a question. Have you ever seen Japan take out Nepal?
I did. I think Mark the Shark did it in my first YouTube war when he was playing as Japan. I think he sent an airborne in there and took it.
Yeah. Because if you take out Nepal, there's no more Gurkhas.
Mm-hmm. And that's great. So that's excellent. Especially because they're neutral, so you can't really help defend them. So just one airborne in there can really hurt you.
Well, we did give them a militia.
You did?
Startup.
I hadn't noticed that. Yeah. Okay, cool. A little bit of help.
But still, it is an easy. It is an easy target. So yeah.
So I like those. I think Gurkhas are one of my favorite units in the game. They were in V3, and I'm sure they will be in V4. Moving on down here to our vehicle class units. Not a ton of changes, but there are some big ones. Starting off first with the Cavalry up here. You can't buy them after July of 1939, which makes a ton of sense. So can you talk about this a little bit and how it affects the gameplay?
It was a change that also came about due to how we watched the players utilize cavalry. We don't want some sort of cavalry spam where they just overflow the entire map. I must say I don't think it's a winning strategy because they have very poor defense value. So if they stand alone if you have 20 cavalry standing alone without aircraft, without any other support, they will be easy prey. But there's no reason to have all this cavalry. So we wanted to implement some sort of restriction. And we went with the July 39. We could also have said 2 per turn, but somehow I think having it at a set time is better for this unit.
I agree, because it kind of signals the transition to more modern armies there, because you're getting the mechs at the same time, if I remember correctly. It's a big
so the medium armor and the mechs, they come in the next turn. So
okay.
So it's if one cavalry.
Yeah, they got pushed back, didn't they? Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. And so along with the cavalry, we're going to kind of fold into the light armor, because in version 3, light armor and cavalry are a very similar unit. You know, they've got 1 more attack than defense, move 2. They're pretty cheap, so you can get a lot of them out there. And so with the light armor, at least the way that I play, whenever I'm buying mechanized infantry, it's either a mechanized or a light armor, depending on whether I think I'm going to attack or defend with it. Of course, the mechanized have the blitz in there, which is also good, which usually gets the nod when you're Germany. But with the Russians, I think light armor is probably my favorite unit, because they're awesome. You can really, really hurt the Germans with just a bunch of light armors. So this change, I'm going to be honest, this one made me sad, because they're not as good for the Russians anymore. But it is a really, really interesting change. So can you talk us through this one a little bit?
It was actually, we did a mix-up of what exactly is a medium armor unit. In the earlier versions, medium armor was not just bigger tanks. It was also representative of better doctrine. So in version 3, the blitzing doctrine, the blitzing capabilities came with the medium armor unit. The problem with this was that light armor was, I mean, you like light armor, but most players, they never buy them.
Yeah, I think I'm in the minority with that.
And if something is never bought, why have it in the game?
Mm-hmm.
You can argue that, well, the game needs light armor due to historical accuracy and stuff. So we wanted to make it worthwhile buying. So we actually we tested a lot of, I think we spent a year testing various stats of light armor. And it was actually very, very easy to make it too powerful. Mm-hmm. The blitzing capability we gave it enables, especially Germany, to play around with the more strategies early on, because they can actually now do blitzing with light armor early. So it's an option for them. We wanted to give them the very poor defense value, because they represent units that typically need supports, either by aircraft or by infantry.
Absolutely.
So it's and one other thing that is in play here is we changed the minor port capacity from 3 to 5 IPP. Mm-hmm. So now you're actually able to send in light armor and get those in places where you perhaps not would have otherwise.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That could be strategic naval movement or Lend-Lease, for example, stuff like that. So
that's interesting. That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that.
So hopefully we'll see. I mean, playtesting have shown that we have seen more light armor units being used now. It's not the greatest unit in the game, and that's not how it's meant to be anyway. So
yeah, the balancing on these cheaper units is really tough, because if you're given a unit that costs 4 blitz, then it's really easy for that to get out of hand. The bad stats do make a lot of sense, but I am sad to see my attack 4 move 2 cost 4 unit go. That's really sad.
You actually bring up a very good point here, because we're in a D12 system, and around 4 IPP, 3-4 IPP, perhaps also 5, there's a lot of units in that area. And so 1 IPP up and down can really, really change a lot.
Absolutely.
Because we don't want any. So now people are not buying artillery anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Now people are not buying mechanized anymore. We don't want units to make other units redundant or obsolete.
Mm-hmm.
So we have these. We have target selection. We have first strike. We have blitz. That's typically the special abilities, and then of course also various terrain modifiers. But these are the capabilities we can give the units, so that they cost the same, but now we can differentiate between them.
Exactly.
But on the same hand, we don't want too many choices here, because it will be hard to remember for players.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't want to have you can take double casualties if you're fighting against this type of unit in that terrain because you roll a 1 or whatever. So we want to keep it simple. We have a simple combat system that works really well for global war, a game of that level of complexity. So we have to, and that's also why, for example, target selection is also kept at 1 and 3 typically. We don't have a target selection 2.
Right.
And you can argue, why is that? Well, it's from simplicity perspective. We don't want target selection all over the place, because then you can't remember, was it 4 here, 3? I can't remember. So we want the game to be fast to play, and that requires some streamlining and some simplification being done. So that's very obvious in these, especially in the land units. Yeah.
Now that you mention it, I'd never noticed that the target selection was always 1 or 3. That's a nice little touch. That's smart.
And it's the same why we have, you can upgrade 2 units.
Right.
Why can you only buy 2 mountain? Why not 1? Why not 3? We want 2 all over the place, because that's easy to remember. If we said you can buy 1 marine, 2 mountain, 4 airborne, and then players they have to resort to the player rates and reference sheets.
Right. Yeah.
So
that's true.
Yeah. So we want to keep the game fast. So these are the things that I put a lot of emphasis on to make it streamlined. So I have some players in my play groups, and when I look at them play, if I see them dropping the ball, hitting for the rule book, I know, wait a minute, he's a good player. Why doesn't he remember X, Y, and Z?
Right. That's smart. It's great. I love the 2 thing, that you can buy 2 of special units. It makes it so much easier. We're going to talk about tank destroyers a little bit. I'm sure that's your favorite subject. Now, I like the tank destroyers when I've got the Russian -1 to cost, because it makes them a 4 cost unit, which is obviously a great deal to get that target select 3. That's gone in version 4. You can only get the infantry class with mobilized reserves. And I think a lot of people were surprised that tank destroyers came out the exact same. So can you talk about the chats you guys had about the tank destroyers while you were designing?
We talked a lot about should it go in or should we take it out? Tank destroyers is one of these niche units. You're not gonna buy a whole army of those and steamroll across the steppes. So it's a unit that you can buy when your opponents do certain things. So let's say that, for example, you have the Spanish Civil War, or you have China, and suddenly your opponent has a lot of anti-aircraft artillery. That typically makes players keep their aircraft away, because there's a lot of risk involved if you're up against an opponent with a lot of anti-aircraft units. In that scenario, you would typically go for medium armor, because you need the offensive capabilities. If you're in mountain, it's really tough to make a breakthrough without some good offensive units. And aircraft are perfect, but if you, for some reason, don't want to have your aircraft in the battle, then medium armor is a good match. But if you have a lot of if your opponent buys a lot of medium armor, of course you can also buy medium armor. But there are various reasons why perhaps you're not able to do so. But if you buy medium armor without target selection, he can just take cheap units off his attack. And then then what?
Right.
So you typically, if you have a stack of infantry or militia, and then add a couple of tank destroyers with target selection, then you can actually take his expensive armor out of the game and really remove his offensive capability. So it's and we also lowered the cost of heavy armor. So now players will typically go for a lot of those, or more of those at least. And then it's also because if you have let's say 20 units or 30 units and throw in a couple of heavy armors, that's really powerful because they will never get chosen typically.
Right.
But if you have tank destroyers, you can actually really take out his expensive units from combat.
I was just going to say, as a little anecdote, in my YouTube game right now, the German player I noticed was sending all of his tanks kind of north and all of his planes south. So I actually bought 3 tank destroyers and sent them up to Smolensk, and then I bought 4 anti-aircraft guns and sent them down to Kiev. And we'll see how that works, but I have begun to see the value in tank destroyers. I think that they are a little bit underappreciated, though the price is still hard to swallow sometimes at the 5 IPPs.
Well, we actually had them at 4, but then playtesting showed that it was #1 defensive unit.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. That's why I honestly don't know what I'd do. I think I might leave them the same too, because if you send them down to 4 IPP, then that's too good, you know. So it's a fine line, and one that I'm not qualified to walk. So thank you for everything you've done.
Well, whenever I'm walking a fine line, if I have to choose between too powerful and a bit underestimated, I would every time choose under because I don't want a unit that breaks the game. Exactly. So if in doubt, I choose the safe option. So let's say that I'm wrong, and worst case, tank destroyers are shit. We will only have a unit in the game that doesn't do anything, doesn't bought, so that doesn't break anything, that doesn't ruin the game. But if we had it at 4 and people were buying tank destroyers like candy, then so that's Absolutely. Why we
that makes sense. Yeah, I completely agree with that. So thanks for joining us, Morten. Hopefully we'll see you again for another one of these sooner than the break we took this time.
My pleasure.
All right, Morten, I'll see you down in Oklahoma this summer for a very big secret reveal. Unfortunately, Peter isn't going to be there because he's up doing something in Canada the week before. It's some small event. I don't think it's anything important. I'm looking forward to that, and it's going to be really fun.
I'm looking forward to that as well. And I must say, I'm not flying 5,000 miles for anything that is not going to be great. Yeah, it's sad about Peter. He made his choices, so
he made his
he'll have to live with it. So, it's going to be great in Oklahoma.